First off, I just want to say thank you for coming out and being a part of this. I want to thank Jeff for opening up the mill to letting us do this. Let's give Jeff some love. Thank you, guys. Appreciate the opportunity. This has been a journey for me, living out my faith in the context of church and discovering and rediscovering what grace is. I was raised in a very religious home and very strict, and I think we all have stories to tell, and we'll discuss that in a little bit. But the book has been very therapeutic for me because I have kind of embarked on this from the aspect of looking at the idea that many times we find that people are disconnecting from faith and from God, and one of the reasons that they're giving because of that is church. And just so happens I'm kind of in the church business, so I one of my passions in life is to reconnect people to the love and grace of God. And I haven't always been perfect at that. I haven't always done that well, and I haven't seen it done well. And I think if we went around this restaurant and bar, we would hear stories similar. People that, many of you that are scarred, that have stories to tell. Jesus Wasn't Saved is my story somewhat, and it's also a look at different aspects of faith that I think we're missing it within Christianity, within church. And so I write this book. I started about 3 or 4 years ago, just kind of contemplating what it would look like, and so I started writing and rewriting, and I want to give Krister some love. He's taken all my mess and reworked it and polished it up, and let's give Krister some love too. So if I sound smart, it's because of him. But on the back of one of your cards, we'll just get right into it. The first chapter really consists of 3 different parts. The first part is an apology. The second part is a disclaimer about what the book is not and what it is. And then we go into the idea of faith and how I was able to discover faith through the personal tragedy of my own life. And so if you want to follow along, the apology is on the back of this card here. I'm going to go ahead and just read. And I practiced my Samuel L. Jackson voice, but it really didn't come out very well. So you're just stuck with Ryan, all right? So here we go. An apology. And first I want to apologize if I cry through some of this because this stuff is real to me. But here we go. I want to begin with a personal apology. The church has failed miserably at times. As a pastor, I acknowledge that many of you have been cheated. You have been presented with a Jesus that isn't the real deal. Rather than experiencing God's love through those who claim to be His followers, you were left feeling less loved and more judged. I may not or may have been the pastor that failed you, but on behalf of whatever church you had this experience with, I am sorry. Unfortunately, leaders like me are just as flawed and messed up as anyone else. Many of you know that's the truth. But if there's in any way in which I can be a part of healing that which has been hurt, I want to help in that way. I'm sorry if you were given the impression that you were not accepted. That you were a second-class citizen of God, or that you didn't measure up. For those of you in search of grace, who spent years trying to adhere to a legalistic or hypocritical culture, only to be left feeling empty and rejected, I am sorry. Your frustrations have been felt by countless others, including myself. You're not alone. In fact, if you feel unsaved because you were told that you weren't good enough, you join the company of the one who brought salvation to the world. In his day, the religious crowd told him he wasn't good enough either. Welcome to the club. Now we're going to move into the disclaimer. This book is made up of stories, experiences, questions, thoughts, confusions, criticisms, and failures that have shaped my faith in God. Some of this is just me ranting like a pissed off junior high kid who just got his first pimple right in the middle of his forehead on the first day of school. Sometimes you just have to vent a little, and this book has been that vent for me. Most of what I have written, however, is an honest look at what has left the greatest impressions on me as someone who is attempting to follow Jesus' example of love and grace towards those who need it most. Since the journey is personal, this book exposes my heart even with all its shortcomings. I just want to be transparent enough to bring hope to those who agree and yet challenge the thinking of those who may not. I'm a Christian by default, but I follow Jesus by choice. I've seen a lot I don't agree with in church. Your experiences may be different, but I have been often left not experiencing grace from God's people when I needed it most. Church leaders in the past have discounted my walk with God, even called into question my salvation at one time. After years of pouring out my heart for God in the church, one day I was simply disqualified. There's some comfort in knowing that Jesus' salvation was questioned by religious leaders as well, but it still sucks and it still hurts. This book flows out of that place, those experiences. So do yourself a favor. Don't try to read this book as a foundation for systematic theology. That's not the intent of what you're holding in your hand. Don't expect me to be as prolific or proficient in doctrine as you are either. I can't even pronounce proficient because I'm not. That's not in the book, but you know. Again, I take comfort in the fact that Jesus too had some radical positions that were questioned by the religious crowd. This book is simply my story, my confession of faith as it presently stands. Much of what I write has been rewritten countless times, and after this is published, I'll probably grow up and change my positions and opinions again and wish I had left parts out or said things different. That's okay. I personally like the idea that faith is not static and unchanging, but rather that it is progressively nonlinear, always changing and multifaceted to suit the moment for those living presently. Winston Churchill, a progressive, conservative British figure, known for his leadership of the UK during World War II and fellow cigar enthusiast, said, by the way, thank you for the two people who brought me cigars. Yeah. You guys rock. To improve is to change. To perfect is to change often. I agree with his attitude towards change and towards cigars. Parentheses, anything Rocky Patel is a good choice. For those who know cigars. If you picked up this book expecting answers or solutions, please forgive me because I have neither. Actually, I think answers are overrated, to tell you the truth. However, I have lots of questions and doubts, and I'm willing to explore those with you if you'll let me. My hope is that some parts will be a refreshing look at faith, and other parts will raise questions in your heart and mind. Perhaps it can be start of a conversation where we can ask questions, where we can together and feel all right with Jesus loving us just like we are, full of doubts, hang-ups, bad habits, and sin. At the end of the day, this book is written for those who don't measure up and probably never will. So I raise my glass of Guinness in the air, which happens to be Brother Thelonious right now. Let's go ahead and raise them up. Here we go. Cheers to those who are the worst of sinners, missing the mark all the time. This one's for us. This one's for those who are still trying to figure out what faith is all about when much of what we see in the world of faith makes little or no sense of all. Let the journey begin.
Cheers!
So then I get into, after the apology and the disclaimer, I get into from tragedy to redefined faith. So this is kind of a little bit more about my story. Jesus wasn't saved. Not many of us are. I'm not sure about your redemptive status, but to say that Jesus was saved would go way beyond what the religious climate allowed for his day. Jesus wasn't even a good Christian by today's standards. Think about it. Disrespectful of leaders, unwise in his social life, profane in conversations, unfaithful to the commandments, insensitive towards others' feelings, ineffective in his management of time. Jesus was a lousy Christian for sure. You can laugh at that. He's not going to strike you, I promise. How odd that the one who came to bring salvation wasn't even considered saved himself, constantly falling short of religious expectations. So in the book I have this little diagram that shows Unsaved Jesus had irregular obedience to the commandments, and the saved insiders were enforced obedience to the commandments. So one thing that you'll see throughout the book is that I define those that feel like they're outside of the church and the world of faith and that they're not good enough and they don't measure up as outsiders. And those that think that they have it all together, they're righteous enough, and they kind of hit the mark in the world of faith, we're calling them insiders because that's what they think they are. What you'll notice throughout the book is that Jesus calls the insiders outsiders and the outsiders insiders. It's one of the creative things that he did. The unsaved Jesus accepted all kinds of people. The saved insiders accepted only certain kinds of people. The unsaved Jesus spoke about a kingdom for the least of these, and saved insiders promote a subculture for the best of these. Something's wrong with this picture. Saved or not, I do believe in a creator, God. I've seen too much brokenness in the world not to believe in God. Some see evil, human trafficking, world hunger, generational poverty, corrupt politicians, crooked pastors, etc., and question the existence of God. For me, all the wreck of this world fits into the big biblical story of brokenness. It fits too well to count him out. I see the tragedy of injustice and it draws me to God. If anything, injustice has damaged my view of people. Sounds weak, I know. Credit the good to God and blame the bad on people. It's kind of a convenient way of dealing with the God can fix everything with the snap of his finger, but he just watches from a distance as people hurt kind of thought, and I'm cool with that. Where was God when this happened to me or that happened to my friend? I get it. I've asked the same kind of questions myself many times. When I sat at my little desk in first grade learning how to read, my mom made her way into our backyard with a shotgun and killed herself. My point? We all have a story, a past that shapes and defines us. All of us can easily find good reasons to believe all kinds of things about God. That God is distant, cold, angry, and sometimes seems to be the most popular belief, but I have come to believe in a God that is loving and present in the tragedy. God revealing himself through tragedy has always been a problematic way of looking at God's love. Because my own salvation has depended on seeing and experiencing the bad, it's difficult to hear others try to come up with excuses on behalf of God. A tragedy like losing a mom to suicide would for some destroy their faith. But for me, it actually brought my faith into my life in the first place. It was in that dark place that my dad really hit rock bottom after living years with a $200 a day drug addiction, alcoholism, and hopelessness. He was the one who walked into our backyard to find his wife dead on the ground. Through my mom's death, my dad turned to faith and walked into church to discover hope. Just a few months after trying God by attending church, he got down on his knees by himself in the wastewater plant sludge house right here in Marion, Indiana, and cried out for salvation. The plea to God for salvation for my dad sounded like this: Jesus, if you're for real, take away my addictions and the visions I'm having of Jessie, my mom, lying dead and I'll believe in you. He had a made-for-a-movie experience with a Jesus who loved him right in his brokenness. And from that moment on, he was set free from a life of drug abuse and alcoholism. Sucks it had to happen that way through losing my mom, but true anyway. I started believing in God because my dad did. That's what boys do. Ironically, I've learned more about grace from all those who withheld it from me than from the few who gave it away for what it is, a free gift. So I suppose being judged by the church has worked well in my favor as well. It's not that I'm grateful for the tragedies that I've encountered. I'm just grateful for the God I have encountered in the tragedies. It's because I didn't receive grace that I'm empowered now to connect with those who are starving for grace. It's amazing to me how much I've learned by experiencing what not to do from those who are convinced they were right in withholding grace from me. I have been angry with God a few times, attempting to cuss him out or tell him off to make sure he knew where he messed up. But the church has left me feeling angry quite often. It's the lack of grace and complete inability even to give others the benefit of the doubt, the controlling, dualistic us versus them attitude that separates people rather than bringing them together, and the righteous indignation some Christian leaders feel when reading this book that frustrates me. These kind of experiences continue to lead me in paths of showing extreme grace, or at least trying to discover what that's even supposed to look like. Evidently, the beliefs we are left with after having walked through the experience of the day determines what kind of faith we wake up with tomorrow. Our beliefs depend on whether we have money or not, where we live, what we read, who our parents are, or were, what our religious experiences have been, and so on. Chances are, if you believe differently from someone else, your story was different than theirs. Our places of worship, our families, culture, city, country, college, friends, and experiences, they all lead us to define salvation in different terms. To be blunt, salvation for a 12-year-old girl being trafficked for $100 by her parents, then mercilessly raped by a fat-ass wealthy American businessman, is going to look differently than for someone who grew up in the Midwest going to a nice, clean, white Baptist church, whose list of tragedy falls far much shorter. Salvation is relative in that sense then. It's biased, it's unfair, and it depends. I think we're all part of a greater story, all of us. An epic adventure towards salvation. In my experience, it's a lot healthier and more realistic to understand salvation as faith interacting with our personal experiences on our journey towards God than accepting the solid state definition provided by religious professionals. Salvation encompasses more than a magic prayer, a simple confession, or a financial contribution to the church's enterprise. It should be defined through the hope of a person's future, and yet filtered through the lens of their past. Seriously, if even Jesus himself is disqualified by the prevalent definition of salvation, chances are the definition is jacked up. That's chapter 1. Thank you very much. Thank you. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do, because I like interacting and stuff, and if you're here, you don't have to do it tonight. You could do it at some point. Go ahead and take this with you. On the back, there's a Twitter. I'm going to ask you to do a few things, all right? Here's where it comes down to you guys being a part of this experience. Before I say this, I want to say that I believe there's a shift towards grace, and I believe that this book adds into that conversation. I believe it's a conversation that's moving into college campuses. I believe that it's a conversation of acceptance and tolerance. I believe it's a conversation of love and grace that I know I've not seen in church or experienced myself. I believe it touches people's lives that are broken and hurting and messed up. I believe it touches people's lives that feel like they're second-class citizens, they don't measure up. And I think that this is a movement. And what I want this book to be is a catalyst. More than just a book that people buy, they read, they throw on a shelf. I want this to be a part of a conversation that creates momentum for grace. It creates more of a conversation for grace. If you haven't figured it out yet, Marion is very religious. Very.
Right.
70% of Grant County don't go to church, from what I hear. So there's a disconnect between who Jesus is and who we are. And so I want this book to be an enabler for us to have safe conversations. To be able to look at someone and say, this is where I doubt and this is where I have unbelief. You don't have a Christian looking back at you quoting 3 scriptures and telling you to get it together. I'm tired of that. I'm tired of being that guy. To be able to just be safe in church and not be condemned and judged. And so there's a few things I'm going to ask you to do. If you're on Twitter, follow Jesus Wasn't Saved. We're going to be updating and sending out different parts of the book along this journey. I had a 2-hour conversation today with a publishing agent, and I'm getting phone calls and people wanting me to come speak about the book. Again, it's a pre-release, so it's not published yet. but there's momentum starting to build, and I'm really excited about it. And so I want to be able to update you on Twitter and kind of put little snippets of the book in there. That's the first time I've ever used the word snippet, so you ought to be proud of me. That's my author word coming out, snippet. All right? And then I have another card here, but before we do, there's the email there, JesusWasn'tSaved@gmail.com. I would like to hear your story. I'm finishing up the website right now where you're able to just put the story right in the website anonymously, but I want to hear your story. I don't have to share mine without hearing yours. I want to hear yours. Without anyone knowing who you are, I'd love to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly that you've been through. So I've got an email here as well. And on the other card that you'll leave tonight, I would just like you to fill out your name and email so I can update you. That's if you want to subscribe to the newsletter that's going out about the book and updates. Next week I'll be in New York all week. I was asked to come up there and speak. And how cool is it that the week I was asked to go up there and speak, I had no idea, but the Book Expo of America is going to be in New York City, the largest book expo in America. Right. And so I'm going to ask you just, pray for me, think about me next week. It's going to be a really cool thing. But on the back of that as well, I just have like a little area where you can kind of share. It's a small area, so you don't have to share your whole story. I want to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly that you've been through. And on the bottom, and when I say that, listen, my intent with the book, and it continues to move forward, is not to bash church. I mean, after all, I am a pastor, so, and it's not to bash Christianity. It's just to relook at faith and say, have we missed it? If we're not reaching all people, we've missed it. And if people feel unaccepted and rejected by our faith, and by the way that we carry ourselves and our attitude, then we need to rethink how we do it. But I want to hear the good stuff, the things that have been good about church and faith and Christianity and God and life. I want to hear the bad stuff. There's been some bad. And some of you have ugly stories to tell. God does love ugly, believe it or not. And so just like in a few sentences, just kind of share a few things in there. I want this to gain momentum and become a movement of people being willing to share their story without feeling like they're going to be judged or condemned, or that they're going to be less of a Christian or Christ follower, or a Christian at all, or just a person of faith. You don't even have to be a Christian to share these stories. And then at the bottom, you can just kind of, if you'd like to allow me to share your story anonymously without using your name, you can check that, or just say, no, please keep my story to yourself. That would be fine as well. This is my passion. If you want to know what I'm going to spend the rest of my life doing, it's this. Not the book. It's just sharing my story with people and opening up conversation for grace to happen. So I want to thank you for coming tonight. And again, thank you, Jeff, for having us here at the mill. And appreciate it, man. You rock, brother. It's not even looking over here. Thanks, man. And thank you guys for being here. Let's just hang out. And what I encourage you to do is, even if it's not with me, but we're going to be here for a while, just kind of share stories with each other, write that stuff down, give it to Katara. One of the things that Katara was mentioning to me, because as we've really embarked on this together, I want to thank Katara, because there's been a lot of nights I've been up till 2:30 in the morning writing and working on stuff. And thank you, Don, for allowing Krister to be a part of this as well. And it's really a labor of love. But Katara looked at me like this week, and she's like, now how are we paying for this? I think she said it just like that too. And when Ghetto Katara comes out, it's like, all right. So yeah, it's like, how are we paying for this? And so I told Katara, one of the things, we're just going to move into this by faith. If you do believe in this and want to be a part of it and help us out, there's a lot that's going into this. There's some editing that's going to have to take place, some consulting fees and different things that we're embarking on. And like everything that Qatar and I have ever done, we kind of get the plane kind of flying a little bit, and then we start working on all the components of it as we're going, and it's kind of how we do things and kind of learning as we go. And that's really what we've embarked on. But I told Qatar, if anybody's here and you're like, I want to financially be a part of this, and you believe in what we're doing and want to be a part of that, let Qatar know, and she can give you some more details on that. But that's my spiel, so that's my snippet of information. So thank you for coming tonight, and again, get some food and some drinks, all right? Thank you.